You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Welcome to TFM's local watering hole, the 602 Club, where we have all the time to podcast. I am one of your hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and I'm so excited to have back with me I'm sorry, what? 00 what?
9.
Oh, 9. Okay. Okay. It's so good to see you, Christy. I'm glad,
You too.
009, that makes me feel so much better.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm really excited. And unfortunately, if anybody's listening to this episode and you're thinking, oh, well, I know who's coming on next, and you're thinking it's going to be John Champion, John is actually out of town as we're recording this, so he was not able to be with us. So we got another John, and I think that you might know this John very well, John Mills.
Yes, and because of the virtue of my last name, if Christy is 009, I shall be M. So there you go. I have designated myself as M.
Yes.
Excellent. Well,
Which I have a very funny story about M to share later in the show. Very funny one. I think, well,
excellent.
It's not like slap your knee funny. I just thought it was cute. So,
well, way to set expectations for the show. But we are finally talking about No Time to Die tonight, or whenever you're listening to this, because it has finally been released to the world, and we're really excited to finally get to this Daniel Craig's last outing as James Bond. You could find us, of course, wherever you get your podcasts. We would really appreciate your subscribe. We would really appreciate you giving us a star rating and review over on Apple Podcasts. Help people find the show. Of course, you could find us on, we would love your follow on Twitter at the 602 Club and on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. You could also find us online at Trek FM or on Facebook at facebook.com/Trek FM. Of course, you can always join the listeners only discussion group where we can talk to listeners from all over the world on Facebook, and it's called the Babel Conference. You can find that there. And if you want to send us an email, you can go to trek.fm/contact, choose a show, and then choose the 602 Club, and that email comes to Christy and I. And we really want to say a huge thank you. We've got some associate producers here through Patreon, Ken Tripp, Davis Grayson, Ryan Millett, and Daniel Noah. Thank you guys for your support of the network, and if you do want to make sure that everything that's coming to you from the 602 Club, as well as TFM, keeps coming to you, go over to patreon.com/TrekFM and see how you can be part of our team. Every little bit helps. We really appreciate it. Again, that's patreon.com/TrekFM. Okay, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the movie, one of the interesting things was, and John, we talked about this when it had happened, but they hired Danny Boyle to direct Bond. And first, I just wanted to ask you both how you felt about that. Did you have any strong feelings about that? Did you think that he would do a good job when you heard that he had been hired to direct the 25th James Bond movie?
I mean, from my perspective, if the producers think he deserves a shot or she deserves a shot, whoever they're going to get to direct, then they deserve a shot. And so I'm not excited per se for a Danny Boyle movie in the James Bond universe, because it's sort of like, okay, what does that work like? What does that look like? But, at the very least, I know I'm going to go see it, and it'll be something a little different and interesting, spice things up, as it were. So, when it was Danny Boyle's film, it was like, okay, well, sure, let's see what. So I guess that's a boring answer, but I wasn't excited and I wasn't depressed. It was just like, oh, okay, well, let's see what happens.
Yeah, I would say that's initially kind of what I thought of hearing Danny Boyle directing this as well, of just, okay, I've heard, he did Slumdog Millionaire, for example, but don't really know a lot about him otherwise. So we'll see. I was initially hoping maybe they would bring back Sam Mendes, because Skyfall to me was like the epitome of the best of a lot of Bond movies, but definitely the best of the Daniel Craig movies until I had seen this. So you'll see what I think of that compared to this. But yeah, so I was kind of sad that Mendes wasn't coming back because I loved his work on Skyfall so much, but interested to see how Boyle would handle it. And then, of course, he did not end up handling it. We got someone completely different.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is really interesting. I remember having conversations with people about this and just being like, I don't see Danny Boyle's Bond. You know, like, I don't see how he makes this movie because his movies don't really seem to fit within what you would want, really, I would think, as a fan, and just to kind of even expect it all from a James Bond movie. And yeah, you know, Christy, I was definitely sad that Sam Mendes, you know, definitely felt like after Spectre he was done and he didn't want to come back. But you know, when they decided to hire Cary Joji Fukunaga, I thought, I mean, he's done some good work, and I would love to see what he's got up his sleeve. You know, he kind of even just, to me, had the look of, I really think of, he kind of had this feeling of Guy Hamilton to me, who had directed a lot of the James Bond, the early movies, and was kind of responsible for, you know, a lot of the mannerisms, you know, really influential with the look, you know. Fukunaga just kind of has that style, and he seemed to be somebody who has like his own sense of style just personally, and so that's immediately what I thought of when I saw that they hired him. And I thought it was interesting too, but I was reading in the making of book today, you know, they really wanted this to feel like a classic Bond with a contemporary edge. So I don't know if I can ask this question without giving away too much from either of you, but do you feel like then, with going with him as the director, that they ended up getting that when you think of No Time to Die?
I mean, I think there were certain parts that I thought were absolutely, felt like absolute classic Bond sequences and just absolutely felt right. I think of the whole Cuba thing. I thought the whole Cuba thing was exactly that. I thought it was classic Bond with a modern twist to it, a modern flavor. It had the sense of lightness and fun that marked all of my favorite Bonds, because even though Bond was always dealing with the idea of the world ending if he failed his mission, there was always that sense of the pressure not getting him, and him always being cool, you know, just sort of rolling with it and just figuring out how it's going to work as it goes along. There were a lot of cute moments, like you know, downing the drink, you know, in between parts of the gun battle. That's adorable. Like, that's really fun sort of stuff. I thought that the car chase definitely felt like a classic Bond maneuver. So yeah, I mean, there were definitely parts that I thought felt very Bond, but then, you know, if you want to hit the fast forward button, it's undeniable that, for instance, like the final staircase gunfight sequence, really, it feels like a much more modern film. There's a lot more of that realistic stunts bouncing back and forth, you know, elaborate set piece sort of feel to it that we've come to expect with action movies. So that gets transplanted in rather successfully, I think.
Yeah, I think that you really see they wanted to take this movie and make sure they paid homage to all of the Bond films before. I think that they especially felt the weight of this being Craig's final Bond movie as well, and feeling the need to kind of wrap that in a nice bow. And so you did need to make sure that you treated the past Bonds with respect, I think. And I felt like they did that really well with the feel of this movie, and especially with, you know, the iconic things that they threw in to refer to past Bonds. I love that they have this scene of him actually within the movie jumping into a tunnel and then turning and shooting. And I love the messages in the dialogue of referencing some of the other movie titles even. You know, when Felix says it'd be nice to have you back on Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Yeah. I mean, I think, both of you have just pulled out really great points of where this movie, I think, is successful in the sense of what they were going for. If their goal was to make a classic Bond feel with a contemporary edge, I think that's definitely what we get here. And especially for Craig, I think this is the closest merging of old school Bond with his Bond. Just in the scale of the film, the villain of the film, the end sequence of the film where, the villain is their lair, that kind of stuff. John, you referencing, I think, the Cuba scene specifically. I think of actually all of the car chase sequences feel like Bond movies, except for the fact that, when they're in Norway, that car chase sequence is much more modern and is something we hadn't seen before in Bond. So it's a new take on something that's been done a bunch of times in Bond, which is a car chase sequence. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like they did a really good job of trying to merge all of those things. And Christy, something you brought up that I thought was interesting here with our outline for the movie is you asked about this idea of were they getting rid of some old tropes? And, you kind of mentioned here there's really no sacrificial lamb character that you see in a lot of Bond movies. There's no really big, love scene. Kind of harkening.
Other than that one, with him and Madeleine at the beginning.
But I mean, harkening back in many ways to the old school Bonds where like there's the before and the after. There's no, like Pierce Brosnan where they're, let's not talk about Die Another Day. So, but is that something that that you guys felt like that this was also trying to maybe continually take Bond, I guess, into the 21st century, as they might say?
Yeah. So for me, I was really glad that some of the things we've talked about that we were uncomfortable with past Bond films were not in this one. In particular, I'm thinking of although Connery is always my favorite Bond, the scene, I think it was maybe way back in Dr. No or something, where he is strangling a girl with her own bikini top was just really painful to see on camera. And so some things like that, I think you're justified in getting rid of and not treating your characters like that in a movie. But I do like that they still kept the general Bond feel of that he's a ladies' man kind of guy, or that even in this situation where he has this more committed relationship with someone, he's still, flirtatious and mysterious and has a good time whenever he's hanging out with women, whether that's Paloma or Madeleine. But I'm glad that they got rid of the more violent stuff toward women or the sacrificial lamb character, like we've said before.
I think that it does reflect a more modern sensibility in the fact that there's not this sense of obligation to have a quasi softcore sex scene like you do through the 90s, and so the audience doesn't want that anymore, so they don't give it to the audience anymore. And okay, it's just at its core, it's a recognition of the audience doesn't want that anymore. Okay, so you changed it, and so yes, I do see evidence of that. I see that. Some of the stuff is a little clunkier at parts, I think, where there's nothing about this, absolutely nothing about this that I think should even give fuel to, the typical sort of reaction you can get with trying to modernize a character where people say, oh, you have an agenda or something like that. Everything feels very organic in this, but there's still parts of it that are clunky in the sense that they're trying to get rid of the Bond works by himself, and so he has a team working. There's more emphasis on the team. There's more emphasis on other people being as competent as Bond out there. But the clunkiness that I refer to is just the fact that they use too many characters to make the point. I think that the attempts at modernizing could have really benefited from narrowing some of the focus of the movie and reining some of the character scope in so that we could get that a little more clearly and a little more quickly on the way to the conclusion.
I think they do a good job of getting rid of the old that's not needed and But I do feel like this also does a great job of, something, Christy, you had mentioned before, which is being an homage to everything that's come before as well, and doing that in a good way for the most part. John, I think specifically what you were talking about with the characters, there's something I really want to get into a little bit later on that, and we will for sure, because I thought the way that they made the point was much different than I thought they were going to. So, but what I was interested in, and I promise we will get to that, but this movie starts off with Madeleine's history, which is something that no Bond movie has ever done, which is to kind of give us this opening sequence that doesn't have anything to do with Bond, which is really interesting. And so, and obviously, we had kind of heard some of the story slightly in Spectre when they're on the train, and she gives up some of the story. And how did you guys like this as kind of our setup for the entire rest of the movie, really?
So I actually hadn't seen Spectre in a while, and for me it was nice getting kind of a refresher on that as well. But I think that this helped start the movie in a good way, even though it didn't initially have Bond. The way it was shot, the way that I always love being brought into a story rather than started from the beginning with a disclaimer or a expositional screen cap kind of thing. So the way it began was really interesting to me. And then even though it didn't have Bond, like I said, I think that it was captivating because it was so measured, I think is the best way I could describe it. Everything they're showing you and you're hearing has purpose. And it felt like it took a beat to just be the creepy scene that it was. And then jump into Madeleine present day with Bond and sort of that emphasis on having so many secrets and stuff, and that there's all of this that happened to her that's going on the inside that Bond doesn't know about. So I liked it. I thought it was a really great way to start it.
I mean, I think I thought it was a good way to start it. I thought it was interesting and different, and interesting and different is good. And I do agree that it was a well constructed scene. I'll be completely honest though, that it can be a little disorienting because I have always enjoyed that opening action sequence. I've always gotten such a kick out of it. And I understand this serves the story better to open this way. I understand that argument, but there's also a regret that I have because that opening action sequence always established who the story was about, that it's about Bond, that it's, hey, welcome back. Yeah. Here's our boy. He's up to no good again, and he's doing his thing. Now, obviously, the character's in a different spot from the previous film. And so I think that what it really reflects is that this is a series that in the Craig years, at least since, probably since the beginning, I would say, it's not an anthology anymore with Daniel Craig. Daniel Craig is a packaged storyline. And so, in that sense, okay, opening like this makes more sense for this type of, story, the way that you're going to approach it. But, I'll cop to it. I really usually love the big opening action sequences. And so I was a little, disappointed is too strong a word, but it was like, oh, well, okay. Yeah. All right. I get it. But like, it's sort of, just, it didn't get my blood pumping right away. And so that's a different thing as well for a Bond movie. I'm used to my blood pumping right off in that first 5 minutes, as opposed to slowly taking its time to build and present something.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. I mean, this movie does take its time to build into its story. And part of it, I think, is the beginning. And I think you rightly put this. And I was talking to some friends after we saw the movie. And, the way I think of Craig's run as Bond is the difference between Nolan's Batman films and the other Batman films. They're all loosely connected to one another. And then you get Nolan, it's its own thing, and that's exactly what Craig is. Craig is Bond, and yet he doesn't have the connection to the other Bonds, really. Like, they are telling a whole arc story from Casino Royale here to No Time to Die. It's a full thing in the same way that, Bruce Wayne in the Nolan Batmans gets an entire arc, and once it's done, and it's very similar to that. And so I really appreciated that they started off the story like this too, because Christy, many times we talk about this idea of like how you will just tell us something instead of showing us something. And, obviously she had told part of this story in Spectre, but instead of just pulling that and then using that as the motivation, they actually go into detail here and really show you what happened to her, and of course the connection that she then has with Safin and him rescuing her, and this weird connection that all these characters end up having to one another is kind of fascinating. And so by giving us this opening sequence, we are allowing the character of Madeleine to grow, and grow in who she will be, even to James in that scene, to help set the sequence of the fact that, does he know her, right? And it helps build into that whole sequence. She pulls out of the water. He's like, where did you go? And, he knows there's some secrets. He knows there's something she hasn't told him yet. And they're almost about to get to that point. And then, of course, the whole thing blows up in his face, literally, when, Blofeld makes his move there and blows up Vesper's tomb. And so, but I thought that all of this just works really well into setting up the stage for it's like the character motivations for our quote unquote hero characters, I feel like really work for Bond and for Madeleine and the choices that they make throughout this movie.
And I think that you're right, though, too, John. I understand the way that you felt as far as not having the Bond opening sequence we expect. So, definitely like some of the iconic ones I remember. I remember Roger Moore with the skiing opening and, the parachute and everything being so cool. Yeah. But so it's like, I do miss that. And that's something that as a lifelong Bond fan, I love. I guess I realized that this is, like Matt's saying too, its own thing. And they're setting a tone for this being a much more serious, in-depth, emotional version of Bond.
Yeah, I think, though, that part of what the opening gets at as well is that it does take a little bit of time to get where it needs to go. And while I'm no fan of rushing things, I think that the film's runtime, death by a million cuts, basically. Like a little bit of trim here and there would have benefited everything as a whole. And I think if you look at the beginning, I haven't seen it more than once, but there's very much a sense of they're probably in a box in terms of what they want to tell and stuff like that. But it feels a little too long to get to these points, in the sense that I want them to get there a little bit quicker, especially because that opening sequence is sort of like housekeeping from Spectre. It could go a little bit faster. You could trim just a little bit out of it, and then trim just a little bit out of, getting to Vesper's tomb. And then that gives you more time to breathe later on in this story, as opposed to that opening, the entirety of it plays a little bit more like a streaming series sort of thing, where it's like they're so intertwined. And I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying that right there you can see that this is a movie that's going to indulge its runtime as opposed to be focused on economy of storytelling.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I think for me, I've always enjoyed more of the indulgence. You know, I mean, my favorite Bond movie is On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is one of the longer Bond movies anyway. And its indulgence of time really, I think, works its benefit because of the relationship you get with, Bond and Tracy in that movie, obviously being a huge part. And to me, I think I need this movie to have Madeleine's history and then move to Matera, and that whole sequence, so that I really feel the hurt and betrayal for both Bond and Madeleine, so that when he puts her on that train, it feels like, I feel it. These are two people who are literally trying their hardest to move past their lives and to make a future together, right? And to let go of the past and move forward, and things keep getting in their way. And this movie, obviously it's Blofeld that gets in their way again, and creates the sequence where he creates mistrust between them again, and they're not able to reconnect till later. But I feel that in later, and it helps those sequences, especially when Blofeld, I think, explains what he did, because I really saw the pain and the agony that it puts these characters through as they were just about to make a huge breakthrough in their relationship, and then it all goes to crap again. And so I guess for me, like, I really enjoyed the way that the movie begins, and personally, I just enjoyed the fact that the movie was going to take its time with all this stuff, and it wasn't going to rush through things, especially to me, if you want to have the emotional punch at the end, where you're really feeling what they want you to feel at the very end of the movie, So I feel like spending the time here made that punch. Like, I turned to my wife. I had already seen it on Thursday. She turned to me and just looked at me like, I'm going to kill you for not telling me I was going to cry the whole movie. And so, I like that, but that's exactly what they want. I went and saw it again the next day, and this lady next to me is just like sobbing by the end of the film. Like, right, that's what you're looking for. So,
and that's fine, because but the thing is, on the balance sheet of the runtime, on the balance sheet of the edit, right? If you're going to commit to taking that time to set all of that up, I'm not saying it's I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but there are other choices you can make later in the film too, to tighten things up and just get there faster. Like, not because I'm impatient. I can sit through a long film with the best of them. One of my favorite films from the 1990s is Michael Mann's Heat. That one clocks in longer than 3 hours, I think. I saw that film literally 2 days after I had my wisdom teeth extracted, and I stayed awake and captivated by that film the entire time, because Michael Mann is an overlooked and underrated master filmmaker. But anyway, so I don't shy away from the long runtime. I'm just saying, like, if you stack it this much here, and there is a lot of good story and a lot of good character building in this portion, what do you have to remove from the scales later to balance things out?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to, because he plays such an interesting role in this movie, I wanted to talk about Safin and him as a villain. And, firstly, he has that infantry conversation with Bond, where he says that, they have a similar history. And when you think about it, and then Bond admits that that's the truth, that they were thrown into the fight before they were even ready. Before they'd even had a chance to grow up. Both of them lost their parents, right? And I just really thought that this was so interesting, because it is this mirroring between the characters. And I, regardless of what ends up happening with Blofeld's parents, taking Bond in, he has these other parental characters in his life and then he has this family with MI6, and it was really interesting to see the way in which these two characters, because Bond even says, we made different choices. And it's absolutely true, but to me, it was also reflecting on the fact that, yes, Bond's a killer for his government, right? He's an assassin. But this Bond specifically really has a code, and that code has come from this family that surrounded him, from, Blofeld's family taking him to then this MI6 family, and the way in which family makes a difference on how we turn out. And I was really fascinated about that idea. And to be honest, it's the one place in the movie which I wish there had been even more. Like, John, you were talking about ways that you can, add some runtime somewhere, or trim here, or, those kind of things. Like, this is a part of the story which I would have wanted even a little bit more focus on.
I liked Rami Malek as the character. I thought that it was an interesting villain, but I do think that one of the film's greatest sins is that we don't get enough time with him. I do know that I don't know in great detail. I know that the production history of the film, there were some reshoots, there were some reworks, and I think that his character probably suffered in those reshoots and reworks and got reduced as they shuffled some other story points around. I would have liked to spend more time with him just because I found him so much more interesting. Now, that comment in and of itself, coming from a Bond fan, is strange, because usually the villain doesn't show up until the end, and then they have a long monologue about what they're going to do. I mean, we don't even meet Donald Pleasance's Blofeld, like the iconic version of that character, until very nearly the end of the movie. And so it's, I guess, one of those things where I just wish there was more of the character, so that there would have been more time for him and Bond to spar intellectually, so that intellectual confrontation at the end has been built to, as opposed to just quickly there. So that, it's a compliment of sorts to say that I wish we'd gotten more time with him, because he was a really interesting character. Although I do want to ask a question. I'm sorry, Christy, to jump in like that. I seem to recall in early press stuff that his character was some sort of deranged eco-terrorist. And that motivation didn't really come across in this for me. And I took my middle child with me, and I asked her what was his motivation, and she was like, kill people. So, like, I think possibly that's our biggest sign that something got shuffled around in the reshoots and everything, is the fact that his motivation gets muddied, as it's going along, and it's just, he just wants to kill a bunch of people. And it's like, oh, okay. Usually there's some sort of like megalomaniacal brilliance, some sort of really twisted logic behind the villain's reasoning. And maybe that's why I'm saying I wish I'd spent more time with the character, because I just tease that out a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. You don't get enough of an explanation that really ties together his past with his plan now. It seems like there's several different things motivating him, and that it's not really clear how they're all connected. We get over and over that they say that Mr. White killed his entire family. So, of course, he wants vengeance. And then now that he's got this plan that has to do with the nanobots that are DNA driven, but then he also has the poison garden, and he talks about that this was his father's masterpiece, and, about how plants can be both beautiful and deadly, and you don't know until you touch them. And then it seems like they were going that direction, possibly of bioterrorism, or of, disease being used as a weapon and stuff, but not really having something that connects to why he wants that as his plan for vengeance. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Although I will say, as you call out the whole, plants being deadly thing, I find it very interesting that we're talking about this movie right after talking about Poison Ivy and Batman and Robin.
Oh,
so
geez.
there you go.
Yeah.
So similar. So similar.
Women and plants are very similar.
Oh my. So I think the thing that really stuck with me about him as a villain was the fact that Mr. White comes to kill his family. His family works for Spectre, right? They're this evil family, right? At least his dad is, and he seems to have been raised, with those values, of Spectre, right? Blofeld's henchman calls Madeleine a child of Spectre to throw Bond off at the beginning of the film. But Safin truly is a child of Spectre. And that child, whose parents were killed by him, does exactly what Spectre would do, right? He longs to take Spectre out, and then he wants to continue their mission, but through his image and for his benefit. And so, I saw this as, for him, that he's a true believer in the mission that Spectre has, but they betrayed his family. So he'll take that mission and he'll make it his own, but he's also going to kill them in the process, right? And so, to me, it did all end up working together better than I think it has for some people. And part of that is because he does kind of become the classic Spectre megalomaniacal, where he talks about the idea that some are meant to rule and the rest to follow. He's a classic, Drax level, Blofeld level villain. He's even doing some of the same. He's doing the same type of biological type of warfare that you saw on Her Majesty's Secret Service with Blofeld and Drax from Moonraker. If you put those two together, and he has a lair that feels like it comes straight out of You Only Live Twice and or Dr. No. So, he's a conglomeration of a lot of those type of villains, and I absolutely agree with you, though, John. I do wish that we had spent just a little bit more time with him, so we could have fleshed out all of that just a little bit more. Because I think another really important thing with Safin is that you have this juxtaposition not just between him and Bond, but between him and M, right? M creates this weapon to save the world, not thinking necessarily about how badly it could be misconstrued. He obviously is taking all the precautions he can, right? But still, to create this weapon in the first place seems like just a bad idea from how easily it's misconstrued and then taken and weaponized to try and destroy the entire world with.
I just want to say that if they wrote this film about a level 4 bioengineering virus facility in the center of a major city with a virus that gets out and poses a threat to the entire world before 2020, I think that somebody needs the Crystal Ball Prophecy Prize for putting this script together. And, it was one of those things where I saw the building and I was like, oh, yeah, that's not good. But, funny story about M that I teased at the beginning. See, you kids, listen this far in and you get the story. What's great is I took middle child. I bribed her with candy, which sounds weird, but when it's your kid and you're like, hey, I'll get you candy and popcorn if you go to the movies with me, that's okay. And so, every so often I would ask her, I was like, does this make sense to you? Just get the kid's pulse on what's going on. And yeah, she was with it the whole time. She's a bright kid. And at one point in his first scene, while Ray Fiennes as M is talking, because she's a Harry Potter fan, I said, lean over and I whispered to her, I go, that's Voldemort. Who? That guy right there. When he's on screen, I'm like, that's Voldemort. She goes, no, it's not. So I thought it was very cute that I can look at Ray Fiennes and I'm like, yeah, that's Voldemort. And she looks at it, she's like, wait, no, he's got a nose and everything, and it's it throws her off like that.
That's not the same guy.
That's great.
But yeah, I thought, bravo to them for having an extremely topical sort of discussion about how government bureaucracy can create things that are awful, especially when you have compartmentalized agencies that don't talk to each other and don't coordinate well, and there's no check and balance about who is authorizing what in the shadowy halls of power. So, yeah, really big time bravo to them for that one. Seriously, like it was, all right, a topical Bond. Excellent. Well done.
And on top of that, when you look at what, I love that conversation that M and Bond have, because M's like, I believe, and I've spent my entire life defending the principles of this. And he kind of looks around where they are right next to the Thames, and he's like, this, this is what I'm trying to protect. And whereas Safin's character is saying, no, some people are meant to rule and others to follow. Everybody just wants to basically be told what to do, other than the few basically gods among us kind of thing. And this whole idea of like, and I mean, I couldn't think of a more topical discussion either, John, of like, talk about like some people saying, no, I'm protecting freedom, and like, because Bond even kind of makes fun of it. Oh, they're trying to take away freedom, blah, 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 all the usual. And, but that they're all the same, right? They're all people who believe themselves to be the ones that should be leading and everybody else should follow. And whereas Bond is protecting the idea of liberal democracy, you all should be able to make the choices that you long to make in your own life, and I'm going to make sure that you have that ability, because somebody doesn't take that away from you. That's why I think we love this character, is because he's the one who stands between us and the precipice of destruction, and megalomaniacal maniacs who want to take over the world and just either destroy half of it or turn it into something in their own image because they know better.
Well, I think that's something that is more interesting. I think it's more interestingly explored here than it was in Spectre even, is the idea that the bad guy in this is actually able to use the government's own mechanisms against them to create exactly what he wants. This is not, if you really think about it, and they do this in Spectre as well, I acknowledge that, but I think it's more interesting here, the fact that what is at play here is again, just the structures of power being used against the very people who set them up, because they don't realize the monster that they've created, that they've authorized, that they have extended through time by setting these powers up for themselves to begin with. Like M might be sitting there trying to defend, quote unquote, this, but it's because of the system that he helped put in place that it's all in danger.
Yeah, that's true.
Because that's exactly what can be manipulated by somebody who wants to destroy that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's crazy how the argument for Frankenstein's monster has become such a relevant thing over and over and over again, about you created this thing that you thought would be used for good and someone else took it and twisted it into something evil. You have to either ask yourself why you're creating it in the first place and maybe not do it, or create it and do your best to protect it from getting into the wrong hands. But either way, it's like all of these things could be called playing God. And I think that was very apt that Bond brought that up.
Yeah. Oh, 100%, Christy. That was great. Well, and just, comparing him to all the petty little men who have tried to rule the world, and that's how we think of them. They're petty, tiny little men who thought that they knew best for the entire world. And, we laugh at them, but then I think the thing that this movie makes me think is that, do we recognize that enough when it's happening in front of us now? That's the question. And I think this movie helps make that relevant. So, and can we just talk? I really enjoyed that personally, that the bad guy had a sweet Lair. I mean, that was tight. I mean, it was awesome.
Okay. Look, I agree the sweet Lair is good, and he had a good sense of personal style. I like the way he dressed. It was interesting.
Yeah, his kimono.
but that sort of like hyper brutalist architecture. Come on, man. I know it's an old missile silo and everything like that, but if you're going to have that much style, at least, I don't know, use a little color, maybe some extra lighting.
Well, he was adding color like with the Monets and stuff like that. I mean, he just hadn't gotten finished decorating.
I guess it just
he was just moving in, John.
Okay, fair enough, but it seems so drab. You would think that somebody with a global point of view would have thought ahead. So I don't know.
Gotten a rug or something.
Or maybe the employees' uniforms a little, why just have the red? Red's a drab, like red, bad, death, danger, something blue, maybe yellow, something like that, a little brightness.
I like it.
I don't know.
I like it.
Could that be the name for this episode? Bad, death, danger.
Oh, man.
I want to give a shout out to Rami Malek myself as well. I loved him in Bohemian Rhapsody and thought, man, he needs to get all the awesome roles because the man could become a character and was so freaking moving. And he did that well with this. I definitely think that he should have gotten more time and that we needed a little bit more fleshed out with Safin as a character. And I liked his garden. I thought it was so cool that ended up, the pool opened up to being the blast doors. And I thought that it was very eerie, him, grabbing Mathilde from Madeleine and walking through the garden of things that she's not supposed to touch, So, I mean, I thought he was a cool villain and that it was a really interesting way to go with what the threat would be. Because, I mean, who would have thought, we've all thought that bioterrorism is definitely possible, but in this way was very different. Having something that you find out could target specifically your entire genetic pool is so creepy.
Yeah. Well, and can I think one of the things that's so interesting about it is how it doesn't really feel all that implausible these days. Like even all the gadgets that they use in this movie just don't feel all that implausible because of where we are technologically. So that was kind of one of the things that I enjoyed about the film is that I just didn't really it doesn't feel that off. Yes, there's some of the stuff that's kind of Bondy and super super crazy, but at the same time it's like, oh, I could see how we could get there, and I think that was the thing that the old Bond movies, specifically, you would have things and you're like, oh, that's ridiculous. But now it just everything feels possible for the most part. And so I enjoyed that. Okay. We have to talk about the new 007 and the fact that Nomi plays the new 007 in the film. After Bond's gone and is retired, they give somebody the number 007. And so I wanted to ask you, one, what you thought of the character and the portrayal and just the idea of, giving somebody else this, iconic number.
I think they handled it well. I thought she was a charming enough character. I think that there's a sense, and maybe this is just me trying to look for evidence of reworks and reshoots. There's a little bit of a sense that she's a little too disconnected from the action at the end, where it feels almost like her scenes were added in some fashion. That may not be the case, but it didn't mesh as well as I would have liked it to. I think also that, and this speaks to what I was talking about earlier with, using too many characters to get to a certain point. I think you could have collapsed a whole thing to have it be that who he meets in Cuba and he works with, who's like, oh, I'm only 3 weeks on the job, and he finds out that she's fantastic, and they get through the Cuba thing, and then all of a sudden he goes back to M, and you find out, oh, you're the new 007. And that way you've instantly established that she's extremely competent, that she's as good as he is, that she's got, and so you could have compressed that whole storyline down instead of having them act adversarially. And I think also it's unfortunate that the time with Leiter and the fact that they have them acting adversarially, I think puts her a little more at, and this is going to be a really clumsy way to put it, a little more at arm's length from Bond at the start than I would have liked. I would have liked her paired closer with him from the get-go. And he doesn't need to know she's 007. She doesn't need to introduce herself as 007 right in the beginning. But something where it needed to just compress a little bit and bring them together faster, so that they could have had more of that interplay, because I do think that she and Craig have legitimate good on-screen chemistry when they're talking and they're going back and forth. And so I think that's just one of those things where I would have enjoyed it a little bit more if they had found a way to make her just feel a little bit more a part of everything, and a little bit more important from the start for the action that's happening on screen.
Those are good points. I felt that as well. It didn't feel like she was as involved in the story after her and Bond's initial confrontations. I think that once, you start to get toward the last third of the movie, that she's really just feels like a sidekick, and doesn't get as much involvement. But I think that it was an interesting idea. I did definitely tell my friend that went to see it with me initially afterward that I wasn't sure how I felt about it, because I was worried coming into this, knowing it was Craig's last film, the direction that they would be going after this, and possibly, who they would replace him with and things like that. And so then also the way that they initially bring in her character in this movie, with them being so headbutting, it made me really uncomfortable, because I was worried. It kind of felt initially like someone who is not a fan of Bond wanting to replace him and also be kind of in your face about it. So it felt almost disrespectful to me initially of the way that they brought that character in. But I do like the way that they then had her character grow, and to see how the two of them are different and alike. And then also to have her eventually get to know him and realize that he's not just some jerk that was her predecessor, and that she's got to prove that she's better than. And I like that they had her then ask for Bond to be reinstated with the original number 007 again. So those things made me feel better about it, and less like it was a disrespect to Bond as a character. But yeah, I think that they could have done a little bit more with her. And the actress was great. I think that she reminded me a lot of the way that Grace Jones performed in her movie of Bond. And she was very great with like the action sequences and the plane scene I loved. But yeah, I think they could have done a little bit more with her.
It's really interesting, because I think your idea has some merit, John, although I would never have given up, having Ana de Armas in Cuba as Paloma. That scene was so much fun with her.
And but that's the problem, right? The part of the problem is that she is so charismatic and such a great screen presence in that sequence that when she exits the movie,
sure,
I'm a little deflated, because I'm like, oh, I want more of her. Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, I've got her pop figure on my. Then it goes.
No, I thought the character was so well done, such good on-screen presence. It was, and she was like, okay, bye. I was like, oh, yeah, all right. I think, I totally see that tension. I guess it's nice that you leave characters and you're like, oh, I want more of that character instead of less. So that's a good thing. Christy, I like what you were saying though there, because I do think intentionally they start Nomi out as the character who is basically trying to prove she deserves the number 007, because everybody knows James Bond, right? Like,
he is a legend, and therefore she is trying to say to him and to everyone, I deserve this number. And I think what ends up being really beautiful about the whole sequence of the movie and the arc for her as a character, which is that Bond is a different person now. And so what starts off as a pissing contest between them, he's the first one to break, to say, here's some information that can help you. And then she, tells M, actually, it was my predecessor gave, and part of that is, I think, for Bond, this is personal. This is not just business anymore, because the life that he has lived, the choices he's made, has created some very personal stakes in what's happening here. And so he's willing to let go of those things that before a character like himself would not have given up. He would have done a pissing contest all day, but he's not into that. And I think what this does, as opposed to saying anybody can be 007, to me, this reinforces the idea that there's only one 007, and that's James Bond. And regardless of who's playing him, you can't just give anybody else this number and they be that number, because 007 is James Bond and James Bond is 007. There's no two ways about it. And what I liked about it is that by the end of the movie, it's a really great tribute to the fact that this character is this character, and so in many ways, her character reinforces that idea. There's only one 007, and it's James Bond. And I really appreciated that. And I liked her in the role. I thought she was very fun. Like, John, you mentioned the fact that Lashana Lynch and Daniel Craig have some great chemistry, I think, on screen. I think that was really good. I think what's interesting about it is I'm kind of left with a character that I would love to spend some more time with, in the same way that where GoldenEye gave us Sean Bean's 006, right? And them working together, and how fun that was at the beginning of that movie. And then, of course, he turns out to be the bad guy and yada, yada, yada. But, we very rarely see other 00s in the first place. And so it just kind of showed me the legitimacy of maybe showing more 00s in the future, Bond obviously is 007, so there's got to be 6 others before him, and there's got to be probably a few others after him, so in number-wise, so why not utilize them more often?
Me.
Well, I mean, you don't think that
009.
No, but you don't think that they get together at least an annual potluck? And, the 00s are there, but then you have 010 through 019, and they're all their own crew, and they have different baseball or softball teams and stuff like that. I mean, this is a whole possibility we have for a series.
No, I mean, they're just trying to one-up each other with the McAllen age that they bring, so, yeah.
Oh, well, no, the 00s are concerned with Spectre, and then the 010 through 019, they're concerned with some other massive organization and stuff like that.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah, and it turns into a big competition, and it's you still can't take care of Smurfs, huh?
Yes. Oh, gosh.
I did want to say, by the way, the one thing that I thought was having Naomi Harris as Moneypenny. I was so glad she was back, but if there was anybody that was going to be more of a partner up with Bond, I wish that she as an actress got to play the role of the new 007 in that part. Because but then I'm well, I mean, she's already been cast as Moneypenny though, and she does such a great job with that, and Moneypenny is her own thing. So I don't want to take away from that either.
Yeah.
Did either of you ever think that?
I think you hit on something. It would have been a bridge too far to have her suddenly say, oh, well, I tried to go in for the service because I've been going for it for so long. So now Moneypenny is a 00 agent. It's like, yeah, that would have been a little bit far to take it. But
I just love that actress now, and I'm like,
no, I mean, having
she's
her
very
and
good.
Ben Whishaw back as Q was great, though, and getting to see Q's place and like getting to spend a little bit more time with the 00 family, was enjoyable, and and that's one of those things where, I don't know, maybe you could have cut some of those scenes or whatever, but I think with this being Craig's last movie, it's one of those places where they were being indulgent.
Those are definitely the scenes. I think that you can sense Phoebe Waller-Bridge's fingerprints all over them, because they very much play like parts of episodes of Killing Eve, and that's unfortunate because Killing Eve is cute, but it's not weighty, if that makes sense. And so while I understand and respect liking those scenes, and I didn't dislike them per se, those were the sort of things that I would not have added. And those were the sort of things I would have compressed and cut out in order to get this closer to 2 hours and 20 minutes instead of 2 hours and 43 minutes or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. That definitely makes sense. So we should definitely talk about Bond and Madeleine. I mean, they're the heart of this film. And, their love story continues from Spectre, and obviously their love story now includes the fact that Bond has a kid, Mathilde. And, it creates his sacrifice. And I think, when we talk about the legacy of Craig, with his Bond and 5 movies from Raw Killer to A Man in Love and a Father, would you have ever in your wildest imagination thought in Casino Royale they're going to take Bond from being a character who has been what he's always been to being a guy you could see him being a dad and actually wanting that? Like, I would have never expected that. And I feel like they successfully made that work. And I mean, their love story and everything that happens to them in this film, I mean, had me choking up at the end when, he's standing there and they're talking and, it goes to white because he's gone. And it was an interesting reversal, obviously, from On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And to me, it works like gangbusters.
That was one thing I just wanted to say, Matt. I wasn't sure how you would feel about it because I know that you love the Tracy story and On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and that this was more leaning into him and Vesper Lind and now having Madeleine. So I didn't know how you would feel about that.
Yeah, I think I would be annoyed if they were trying to connect his Bond as being the same character as that, but it's not, and therefore, just like Nolan's Batman, I don't have any interest. I don't have any problems with any decisions that he makes in that series because it's its own thing. This is its own thing.
Yeah.
And where they go next will be its own thing apart from this. So, this was all about completing the arc for Craig's Bond. And so Bond and Madeleine together, I mean, I loved her in Spectre, and then the fact that I knew she was going to come back in this, and they really flesh out that whole story arc for them, I thought was phenomenal. And to me, I could not have been, I guess, honestly happier with the fact that they pushed the boundaries with this character, and they did it in a way that I think they took their time enough with it in this film so that I think they earned it. They earned everything they did with these two characters together, and it worked.
Yeah, I mean, the ending, this is the thing, is I'm going to get blubbery if a guy with a daughter has to sacrifice his life. I'm sitting there with my middle child, right? Like, that's immediately going to hit a chord, especially when it's a daughter sort of thing. So that's immediately going to get me a little choked up. And I did think it was bold and different to actually kill him. How many times have we seen Bond get out of it at the end? And this is the first time Bond has died. And it's like, wow, okay, that is really, really different. And it does bring into focus how much the character means to you. You're like, oh, wow, this is, and I'll straight up say that, and I know this is going to be a controversial comment, but like when Luke Skywalker dies at the end of The Last Jedi, I was confused because I was like, not confused, but like my emotions were mixed up because it was like, oh, I love Luke, but I didn't really love him in this movie sort of thing. And so you're playing on emotions that existed outside of this. Whereas in this, even as in a self-contained story, Bond's death works divorced from the previous 24 films. This is simply a guy who's found out he had a daughter and he's giving everything up because he can't imagine life without her. And it's like, okay, I get that. I understand it.
Yeah.
And so, it is moving at the end. It is different. I think it puts us all in the position, though, because it is the first time Bond has died, for us to wonder, is this just a big reset button? This is the first time we've had that self-contained Bond arc. And it's like, so does this mean everything resets to the beginning? Does this mean that we're going in a completely different direction? Are we never to speak of James Bond again? Is it all now just the spy franchise sort of thing? And it's like, so I'm really curious coming out of this, where we end up. Where are we going to go after this? I mean, part of me says, okay, great. We're going to go back and we're going to hit the reset button. We're going to go all the way back to the 60s and we're going to make Bond a period piece and put this character, divorce him from any modern controversies about how the character behaves and put him back in a bygone era so that people are a little more forgiving of the type of person he is. And at the same time, give sort of like an alternate history scenario where we see that he made it possible even to be alive at this point to see these stories. So, I'm interested. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, you raised the best point. I think by the end of this movie, I felt the same way. It left me both excited but also concerned about what now. Because it's the first time Bond has died, and that's an uneasy feeling, especially when you've watched every single Bond movie and watched them all multiple times. You know that Bond gets away. So seeing him not get away, you're like, oh no, now what?
Yeah.
But I think that it was a fitting conclusion to Craig's arc. I think that it was so emotional because of the way that they showed Madeleine's story and the deep feeling that he and Madeleine have for each other, and then having a child. For me, the most gut-wrenching moment is when he is in the pool with Safin and finds out that he's been poisoned. Because it's like, all that's happened to me is everything being taken from me over and over and over and over again. And now this is taken from me too. Like, he's just completely wounded as much mentally as he is physically in that moment. And it's like, you just feel all of that weight in him. And Craig does that so well. He's such a good dramatic actor in that sense. So I thought it was a really great way to do it, but also hard as well.
I really like the way that you put that, Christy, and I think I can't say enough about the performances for Sadu and Craig in this film together. I think they do a great job. Just so good. I mean, there's so many scenes I love with her, and part of it I love with her is that, you talked about the tropes at the beginning. Like, she's not a damsel in distress. She rescues herself many a times in this film, which is really cool. And she has, and part of that is like, she's fighting for her child, right? And John, you being a father, like bringing that up, that idea, there's something that happens to you when you're a parent that other people don't understand what you do for your child, and when they're in danger. So I thought all of that was great. And yeah, Christy, the way you put that with him and Craig, a bond of what he's giving up, but he has to make sure the world is safe for what he leaves behind. And what he leaves behind is a woman that he loves ridiculously, and a child he will always, he would always wish that he would know. But that he'll leave the world a little bit safer for her to grow up in. And I think allowing this character to have these bonds of the heart that are more than just queen and country, that it's so much more personal. It's all of that, right? Like his little family is a representation of all of the families of the world that he's trying to save. And I think that just brings to home, the reason that, again, we really love this character who, for all the ridiculous adventures he's had, that's his goal, is to make sure that you can have your family, right? And that's why we respond to the character. And I think, like you said, John, the reason that we then also feel something so much when this character finally dies, and in many ways it's very similar. The only thing I can think of is The Dark Knight Rises, where Bruce Wayne gives up being Batman so he could go be happy with, Catwoman, Selena Kyle. He's going to go start a whole new life. He's going to give up the thing that you've never seen him give up. For Batman, that was more than dying. For Bond, honestly, it's that he can't cheat death anymore, and so, but that he wouldn't want to, because honestly, dying is even better for him than living. Because living would mean he would never be with the person he loves the most. And the child he would never know, because he would never be able to be with them. And so, I just, it's so emotional, so well done, and I think it's so well earned, and it makes this the most, it makes this the most incredible run for Bond. So, okay, I want to talk to you guys about the action of the film, because I think, obviously every Bond movie, it's an action movie. We've got the great chase in Italy, we've got the Cuba sequence, we got the Norway sequence, and then we have what happens there at the end on Poison Island. And any favorites there? Anything really stand out to you that you guys, that you really liked? Was there anything you didn't like in the action sequences that they created for this movie?
No. I thought the action sequences were all great. But again, like I was talking about earlier, the Cuba sequence absolutely stands out to me. I just thought it was the energy of 1960s Bond with modern technology and sensibilities applied to it. And I just thought I think that entire sequence sings. It's just absolutely beautifully put together, from the way it's shot to the way it's edited. Absolutely flawless. The Norway stuff is very good. And the car chase through Italy is a lot of fun. And like I said, that I can't get enough of that final action sequence where he's going through the lair and he gets up to the staircase. I love that really intricately designed stuff. So the action sequences wouldn't take a thing from there. I honestly think that everybody involved in staging those, in shooting those, in being in those should take a bow, because they did a great job.
I'm with you on that. And I mean, hey, also a thing for Bond fans, it's always about the car, right? So, you had to have an Aston Martin back. And I saw actually the stunt guy was calling it donuts in the square to describe that one scene in Italy. And I love that. So I really, that was my favorite action sequence, was getting to see them using both a car and motorcycles to go up and down all through this city with multiple levels where it's all stone. And And I'm worried the whole time about how the stunt people are doing this. Mm-hmm. And they said, you know, they had to look at wind direction and speed. It had to be on sunny days so that the rain didn't make things slicker. Like, it was really complicated to do those scenes. So I love it.
I was reading the making of book, and they literally poured Coke, like Coca-Cola, on the streets and then let it dry in the sun so it was stickier for the tires. Yeah.
Wow.
So, no, I mean, I think I was blown away by the chase sequence in Italy and really getting to see the DB5, you know, in all its glory, do some really cool things. You know, that car has always obviously been a great car for James Bond and so iconic. So I love that. I mean, John, your pontification about Cuba is so on target. Like, that is the sequence you can kind of lift from this entire movie and just watch that over and over again. And part of that has to do with Ana de Armas. You know, I think Christy, as we kind of talked about before, is some of the tropes that they might have gotten rid of. One of the things I love that they did is that they were not afraid to, like, Bond looks great in the tux. She looks sexy in the dress that she's wearing, you know, and they're in Cuba, right? You play that up like a little bit, and the scene is so much fun and it's so well done. I love it. I think I really appreciated that they did a car chase sequence like the one they did in Norway, because we've not seen that, an off-roading chase sequence like that in Bond before. And so it was a new, interesting way to add something to the Bond lexicon, you know, doing a chase sequence like that and just watching, you know, Bond also at that point, like, this is also different because it's the first time he's ever had cargo, you know, like people he's trying to protect in the car with him, you know, he's not just thinking about himself, you know. It's so the psychology, it's even different. And then, you know, everything on Poison Island, like you said, John, in that stairway sequence, it's everything you expect from a modern action film. And I know a friend of ours doesn't like this, but I'm sorry. When he kills the guy with his watch and the electromagnetic pulse, I thought that was a perfect way of, you know, having a Bond gadget that makes sense. It's not too out there. And it, you know, I mean, it blew his mind. So...
and then the joke.
Exactly.
I
know it's cheesy, but I appreciated it.
I also like the scene in that whole part where he has a bomb, little, you know, like a what do you call it? Grenade thrown down the tunnel at him, and then he throws it back up, and then they throw like 4, and he's like, no.
Yeah.
It backfired, literally. I did want to add too, when he initially gets out of the vehicle in the forest in Norway and starts to like go all stealth mode, I thought to myself, oh, he's pulling a Rambo.
Ooh, I thought that too. Yeah.
I
thought that too.
Good
you know
pull.
what I thought
Good
of
pull.
is that I want No Time to Die, the game, like GoldenEye, because there are so many great levels to play in this movie. Like, I think it would be great. So obviously we're bringing it to a close, and Craig is gone. There's some interesting things that then happen in this movie because we have the death of Felix, the death of Blofeld, the death of Spectre, and, you know, we got to see some fun things like the Aston Martin V8 from Living Daylights was back, which, oh, what a beautiful car. Whew, man. Next to the DB5, that may be the Bond car I want the most. And so what did you guys think of those things? Did they work for you? Did they feel organic to the movie? I mean, did you cry when Felix died?
No, I didn't cry when Felix died, but I do think that Felix dying probably was, it was a well-done moment where it allowed me to reset my expectations, because once I saw that they were willing to kill Felix Leiter, my brain immediately reset and said, oh, okay, everybody's fair game in this. And I have a friend that I go back and forth with about the deaths of main characters, where he hates it And I've always said it's important to do because you then believe that the main character is in danger. And so Felix dying gave a sense of danger to Bond. I immediately knew, okay, everybody's on the table. They're not going to spare anybody if the story calls for them to eat it. And so there you go.
And, I've seen the argument also from the other side with this movie in particular that it seems like, sort of like you were saying earlier, John, like everything is a hard reset here with killing Felix, killing Blofeld, killing Bond. Now what kind of thing? But I think it's more about how you look at it. I agree with you. I think that it feels like it was good timing and made sense with the story arc that we've had with Craig for Felix and for Blofeld to be killed off. But also it was cool to just even have Blofeld brought back, for this era of Bond. That was different. And having Christoph Waltz play him. Oh, I love him.
Let me ask this question. We all know that Bond is going to come back in one form or another, whether it's a streaming series or a reboot or what have you. If this were the last Bond movie, though, if they come out and they say, you know what, it's been the better part of a century, and it has. It's been 6 decades with this character. This character has been on screen longer than I've been alive. If they came out and they said, you know what, honestly, we're out of the James Bond business. We're just doing something else. Is this a fitting end to all of it? Would you feel satisfied with this as the last Bond movie ever made before they just shuttered the franchise and said, we're done?
Yes, not as much as I would have with maybe Skyfall being the last one, because I felt like that would be really going out on a high note, but you can't always go out on a high note.
Fair enough. What about you, Matt?
My wife and I were talking about that, as we left the theater, and I absolutely think this is honestly a great end to the series, and mainly because of the way that the character here had a completely full arc. From killer to father, and it is something that had never happened before. And how they reimagine the character and where they go next, is difficult, I think. And if they're smart, I think what they do is they wipe the slate clean, and they don't bring any of the previous actors back, and they just start over. And they basically just drop you in Bond as normal, and go from there and kind of do the anthology stuff again, because I don't think you don't need another origin story, because you don't need that again. This character is enough in the cultural zeitgeist that you can just create, another story for him. But I think where you go from here and how you bring Craig to a close is that you allow all of that, what he represented and everybody that was in his films, to stay there, and you find a new M, you find a new Moneypenny, you find a new Felix Leiter, you find all of those characters new again. Yeah, because all of that feels like Craig's, because Craig's. I mean, I know M came from the Brosnan era, and she was the only holdover. But I don't think you can do that with the rest of these characters, because they belong to Craig and his MI6 family, and it just doesn't work because and especially since he's dead. Felix is dead, he's dead, like it doesn't really work to move forward with anyone who's been associated with this moving forward. So, yeah, I think this is a really fitting end, and I'll be honest, I think if they were smart, they would hang up their Walter PPK and just be done with it. Because I don't know where you go from here to reinvent the character or make it better, or I don't know what you do. I mean, it feels like after 25 films in 60 years, you've done everything. So, well, I don't know.
The one thing I will say that excites me about possible future Bond films is thinking about who I would choose to play the next Bond. And I gotta say, as soon as I heard it, I was like, yes, I'm on board with this. This is the only person I think is good enough to be next. Let's give Idris Elba his Bond series.
I think it would be interesting if you did Bond as a true anthology series and had a different Bond every movie. I don't know if you can get the traction for it. That might be a straight to streaming sort of thing. The one thing I would want to make sure of is that Bond remains British, or part of the UK, I should say, or whatever, because I don't want an American Bond, and I don't want to.
No, that's part of its allure,
right. But at the same time, I really have a hard time thinking that this is anything other than the end for Bond, to say this is it, because why else would you kill the character at this point? You're making a declaration at this point that this is it. This is the end of Bond as we have enjoyed and loved him. He now belongs to the past. And in a way that's depressing, because it's like, oh no, I've seen all of these movies and I love this character. But at the same time, I understand that each one belongs to an era. And given the fact that Craig's entire run as Bond has grappled with the idea of, is the time of the personal spy done? I mean, our government, thanks to different laws and such that are out there, literally collects all of the metadata on everything that I've ever done, you've ever done, anybody has ever done on the internet. James Bond can't keep up with that. And I know Spectre dealt with that a little clumsily, but is the era of this type of spy done? Is it Q's story now, where the guy with the horn-rimmed glasses sitting there hacking on a computer, tracking people down that way, and it's I don't know. At the end of this, I wonder, is it just the end? So,
yeah, I don't think it'll be the end, especially since the movie did say James Bond will return at the end. And they've already mentioned that they won't be choosing another Bond till next year. They didn't want to get in the way of, Craig having his time and allowing this film to they didn't want to take anything away from that, which I think is brilliant. I mean, don't even have those discussions until, this is basically, ready for home video. I said video as if that's a thing anymore, but home streaming. But yeah, I don't know. Which leads me to an interesting question, because we haven't talked about the fact that Hans Zimmer does the score here. Billie Eilish has the song No Time to Die. How did that work for you guys? Especially is this the last Bond? Was it a good score? Was it a good song?
So I gotta say, I was really looking to see how they were going to do the intro with, the imagery and stuff, how they always do the opening titles for every Bond movie. And then also what they were going to have as the song and who was going to sing it, because I also think having Adele doing Skyfall was freaking brilliant. And it's so, moody and beautiful at the same time. So I was really curious to see how they were going to do this. And I think having Billie Eilish do it was good. I think that she has a similar kind of styling as Adele did. And I think that they did well with how they did the intro again to pay homage to all of the Bonds that came before, but also having it be its own thing. It was beautiful. And I thought the score was beautiful. I think that bringing in Zimmer was a good choice. They previously had someone else who also left due to creative differences. So I'm glad that we ended up with Zimmer on this.
Definitely liked Billie Eilish's opening song more than I liked Sam Smith's.
Yes.
Yeah, and I definitely liked it better than Madonna's, I can tell you that. But I think that this is the opening song is definitely one where they have fallen prey to trying to recapture something. Where Adele was Skyfall's opening music was lightning in a bottle. It was unexpected. It was, oh my gosh, what just happened there? And I think they've been chasing it ever since. And so
yeah, I can agree with that.
I didn't dislike Billie Eilish's song, but I didn't love it. I thought it was fine. I thought it fit, and that's okay. Again, it's not Madonna, thank God, and it's not Sam Smith. But you know, it's fine. It's fine. In terms of score. You know, there was one point, and it almost seems like a joke at this point, where I'm listening and I'm like, oh, I wonder who did the score. And then the drums kicked in, and I was like, this really sounds like Hans Zimmer or one of his friends. And then it was like music by Hans Zimmer. I was like, yeah, okay, pegged it, got it.
I like the opening song by Billie. I think it's good. I think, John, you really nailed that where you mentioned that I think they have been chasing Adele. And that idea of her song, and they've been trying to pull that back. I definitely like it better than I did like Sam Smith's, and it works really well for the film. The lyrics for it actually work really well for the film, so that was good. You know, I liked Hans Zimmer's score here, and partly because Hans and his creative team go with a lot of allusions to old Bond scores, specifically from On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I mean, they obviously use the song All the Time in the World there, and that they actually use some of the theme music from that as well here. But they also use some of the thematic elements from all of Craig's movies, and work that into the score. And the score was fun, and it sounds very James Bond. I mean, James Bond scores have a sound to them when they're done right, and I think it was done well here. So I think all in all, I have nothing to complain about. I've really enjoyed actually listening to the score. It's a lot of fun. And again, anytime you want to pull music from John Barry's On Her Majesty's Secret Service, you can't go wrong because it's an incredible Bond score in and of itself. So, well, it's been a monster episode, obviously, you know, talking about a James Bond movie, and especially one of this magnitude means it's going to be a longer episode. So appreciate everybody sticking with us. And I've got to get to the important question, which is, what would you rate Daniel Craig's final James Bond movie, No Time to Die?
Okay, first and foremost, I want to get out here, and I was talking with somebody about this at work, where I said, okay, context matters. So in terms of last James Bond movie, I look at them and I say, is it better than Live and Let Die? By a country mile. Is it better than License to Kill? Absolutely. Is it better than whatever the hell Pierce Brosnan's was? Yep, sure is. Is it better than
Diamonds Are Forever?
Diamonds Forever. Yeah, it is.
Hey.
It's now you stop that, scamp. And then there's like a weird push on Her Majesty's Secret Service because it's both the first and the last movie. So it's sort of like, okay. In terms of last movie done by an actor playing Bond, I think it's the best one. I think it's the best send-off of all of them. And so if I were to make the final James Bond collection, this is number one. So there you go. But as a film fan, I know I'll rewatch it to see whether this stays pat, goes up, goes down. But as I came out, I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. That's where I stand. Okay.
I have to say, I did a lot of digesting, as I call it, when I'm like mulling things over, you know. I was really worried about how they were going to handle the end of Craig's arc. I've especially, like I said, because I loved Skyfall so much and Casino Royale second. But all of Craig's movies were good. And then also just bringing in some things from all the other Bond films, then seeing how they were going to wrap this up. And where you go from here, I still have a lot of questions, and I think that some things could have been handled a little better in this movie. But ultimately, I still enjoyed it. It had a lot of things I didn't expect in a good way. And I would definitely watch it again. I actually would love to go back and see it again with my friend Erica that I went to see it with, so we could, compare and contrast first viewing to subsequent. But ultimately, I come down at 3.5 out of 5 too.
Wow.
Because it's just not as high on the list for me as Skyfall and as Casino Royale. Although it had a lot of things that I really enjoyed. I think that the editing could have been a little tighter, and I wanted more from the possible new 007. I don't know. Maybe I'll end up changing my mind later and put it at a 4, but I don't want to undersell that I did really love a lot of this.
Well, you're both wrong. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and I know, I've seen even in just on Letterboxd from people I follow and know whatever, it's been anywhere from like 3.5 to 5 stars, right? So it's on the higher end of films in general, and like you said, John, there's only George Lazenby has a better send-off just because he only has one film, and that's just because that's my favorite James Bond movie. So, but when it comes to anybody else leaving the run, nobody's done it better. You're welcome. And I really like this movie. I've seen it a few times now already, 3, I think. Yeah, and I will see it again, and I would give it a 4.5. It's not perfect. It's not a 5-star James Bond movie, but I love it. I absolutely love it. And part of that, I think, is just there's so much emotion to it. And I don't, there's no other Bond movie other than On Her Majesty's Secret Service where there's been this much emotion. And so I cannot say enough for how special I think that is. And it's difficult because, John was saying, this is a character to which I love, and I love this series. And so where they go next is really interesting, and I have no idea, but I'm just very excited. So with all that said, we're going to forgo recommendations this week, but it sounds like everybody would recommend that people go see No Time to Die in the theaters.
Man, I had a recommendation ready, and you do this to me. This is bogus.
Okay. Well, I mean, the show had been so long, I just didn't want, but we'll do recommendations because John Mills wants to do recommendations, so by goodness, we will do it. John, what's your recommendation for everybody this week?
It's spooky season, and I happen to watch it for House Lights over on the Nerd Party Network, but I think people should, especially if they have not seen it, give a shot to Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Gary Oldman as Dracula from 1992. It's crazy. It's Coppola Unchained. It is an insane callback to old style filmmaking. I think it's a lot of fun. It's a little weird, but I definitely think people should check it out. So there you go. Yeah.
Nice. And I actually have mine ready too. Not always the common thing for me, but I know. I actually really want to recommend another podcast I was checking out, which sounds funny to recommend a podcast on a podcast. But anyway, it's called The New Day, Feel the Power. And it's, if anyone's familiar with WWE wrestling, it's inspired by the 3 guys, Kofi, Xavier Woods and Big E, who came together to form a group called The New Day that's part of their wrestling characters. But now they've become such close friends that they call each other brothers and have made this podcast to just talk about stuff that they enjoy and to rib on each other. And it's so funny. I laugh all the time, and I keep telling my husband he needs to listen to it. And the more I tell him, the more he is deciding to be stubborn, I guess. But yeah, I highly recommend checking out the New Day podcast.
You know, I know people might consider this a cop-out, but I'm going to encourage you. Go to the theater and watch this movie. It's totally worth it. Like, if you've listened to this and you haven't gone and seen it, go. It's so much fun. I mean, I had such a great time.
Spoilers.
In the theater watching it with a crowd. Like, it was, and it's been a while since the theater has been this full, which was fun.
Mm-hmm.
And people were like cheering, and then some people were sobbing, and at the end of the movie, like, it was great. It's one of those things, like, it's the communal experience and the joy of going to the cinema and experience a film together. And I mean, we've got great movies coming out throughout the rest of the year with like Dune, and hopefully Ghostbusters Afterlife will be fun, and we've got some Marvel movies coming out. And I mean, like, you know, there's some other movies like The Last Duel coming out by Ridley Scott. I mean, great stuff, you know. So go support a theater, you know, and go enjoy yourself at the movies this fall. And so that's my recommendation. But John, you know, it's been a blast as always to have you here, and I know you're a longtime Bond fan. You know, you guys had walked through some of the Bond movies together over on your podcast, Words with Nerds, as well. So, I mean, I know how much this character means to you, so thanks for being here. And where can, you know, everybody find you if they want to catch up with you and talk to you how you should have rated this higher?
Well, golly, you can find me over as Kessel Junkie on your social network of choice. Letterboxd is where I have the most fun. Try to be a little scamp over there. And you can find me over on the Nerd Party Network, co-hosting a show called House Lights, where we go through the work of filmmakers, either the entire body of work or thematically or by, you know, specific decade or whatever other combination that we have. And also co-hosting a show called Aggressive Negotiations with you, Matt, where we talk about Star Wars from, you know, I think some pretty unique angles where we dig into the weird stuff. But Christy, where else can people find you?
Oh, of course, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at BethBenBell, usually more active on the Instagram side of things, but also on Facebook in the Babel Conference. And when I'm not here with Matt, I also do a show called Sabers and Spells on the Skywalking Through Neverland Network. And we are indeed going to talk about Labyrinth this week.
Oh, no.
So I hope everybody will check that out. I'm going to give my before and after, because both of us have never seen Labyrinth before.
Oh, I can't wait to hear that. I really can't wait to hear that.
So far, all I know is David Bowie.
Oh, that's all you need to know going into that movie. Trust me.
A lot of David Bowie is what I've heard.
Oh, man. Well, you can find me, of course, all over social media under the name MattRushing02. So follow me there. I would love to talk to you about No Time to Die or anything else. Of course, you can find here in the 602 Club feed, Snyder Cuts, talking about everything that Zack Snyder directed with John Mills, who's on this show, as well as Assembling Avengers, which has started as we're making our way through all of the Marvel movies together, kind of checking them out again and minus hype. And, you know, we just got to The Incredible Hulk, and coming out this week, you'll have Iron Man 2. So it's been really fun revisiting Phase 1. You can also find me doing Literary Treks, The Orb, and Warp 5 here on the network. Literary Treks is about the books and the comics of Star Trek. The Orb's about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And then Warp 5, Chris Jones and I are walking through all of the episodes of Enterprise in celebration of its 20th anniversary. And then, of course, you can find me over in the Nerd Party Network, not just on Aggressive Negotiations, also doing it's a Finnish podcast with Drea Kaufman. It was called Owl Post, and we walked through every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. But as always, thank you so much for joining us.
And there's no time to die, you hear?
Thank you.